walk inside a room, you sit down without being told to do so because you know that there are punishments and rewards based upon the way society expects you to act. This is part of the social structure we live in. We've always had a social structure, and people use that structure to move up on the social ladder. We can look at one example of what people were willing to do to move up in the social or racial ladder of the 1850s. After the Mexican-American War in 1848, the United States gained a lot of territory, including New Mexico, which was special because, unlike the other territories, it was mostly made up of former Mexicans with a mostly Mexican-American government. In 1859, the New Mexico Territory passed a slave code like the ones found in the slave-owning southern states. Basically, this code made it near impossible to be black in New Mexico. If you were a free African who came to New Mexico, you could not stay in the territory for more than 30 days, or else you would be fined $50 to $100 and forced to work 1 to 2 years of hard labor. If you were black and living in New Mexico before the law, you had to pay a bond of $100 within 2 months. If you didn't pay that bond, you were forced to pay a fine and then do 1 to 2 years of hard labor. And seeing how $100 was a huge amount back then, you basically would have ended up doing jail time for no good reason. The law went even further, as it also punished non-black women who would marry a black man, and it even punishes slave owners who would free their slaves in New Mexico and not give the slave away out of the state. The law was really harsh, but what makes it seem nonsensical is the fact that New Mexico never really had more than a dozen or so slaves living in the territory. Even weirder still is the fact that this law was passed by a mostly Mexican-American government with a few white American settlers. Mexico had abolished slavery in 1829, yet here we had former Mexicans passing a strong slave code in a territory with pretty much no African Americans. So why did they do it? Well, it all has to do with how groups of people move through the social structures I talked about earlier. What I mean is that this law is basically all for show. When you pass a law like this that only targets a single group of people and punishes them for something that they cannot control, like their race, you are making it known to everyone that the group of people you are targeting are at the bottom of the racial ladder, but just as important, you are making it known that you are above them. In this case, it was the Mexican-American politicians that made this law who were saying that Mexicans were above blacks. So did they actually believe in Mexican supremacy over blacks? Well, that's hard to tell from looking at the law itself. Laws like this reflect the white supremacist view of the world that ruled society back then. These laws are what kept whites on top, so when this law was passed by New Mexico, it was meant to affirm the whiteness of the Mexican American. Back then, when New Mexico was made a territory after the war, the Mexicans who were living there were granted citizenship. In the 1840s, however, only whites were given citizenship. So in a way, Mexican Americans were legally white, but socially they were looked down upon by the European-descended whites. As a result, they did what they thought would help them move up the social ladder and get New Mexico to become a state, even if that involved putting other people, like blacks and Native Americans, down. All of this really shows how existing social conditions will cause people to act if they want to move up in the world. Even though our society is no longer as racist as it was back then, it's important to realize that social pressures can make people do things that will look horrible in the future. It's something that everyone should remember, and a very important thing to learn from the history of Latinos in this country.